I grew up on Star Trek. I was a little young for the first run of the original series, um, but that stuff was in endless syndication. By the time I was old enough to notice um, the cartoon extension of the original series was fantastic. Sort of came of age with Next Generation, turned 16 and then 18 with the background of Next Generation on TV. Spock. Spock was my boy. Remember, it's 1982. I'm probably 7 years old. And mom and dad were watching Star Trek 2 on, on home box office on TV. And, it's past my bedtime. Like I shouldn't be up, but I'm up and I'm sort of hiding, uh, behind the couch and watching Star Trek. I remember when Spock died, when they had his funeral, that I bawled. I cried so hard. I cried so hard I got caught and I got caught and sent off to bed and I didn't get any of the resolution. Yeah, Spock was my boy. Spoiler alert, I guess, for a movie that came out in 1982 and a TV series that ran in the late 80s and early 90s. I think if you haven't seen this stuff, like that's not on me. Anyway, Spock was logical. Spock was a logical dude, but he had heart. He had a great big heart. Sort of the lore of the Vulcans in the TV show is Vulcans are stronger than people. Vulcans are stronger than human beings, and they're smarter too. So when they go to war, their wars are absolutely savage and devastating, and sort of for the safety of their civilization, their species, their whole planet, they developed logic that they would set their passions aside, think things through all the way, become enlightened about the way they're making decisions to avoid just horrifying wars, right? So the Vulcan race and Spock in particular is presented as cold, calculating, logical, rational, but not devoid of emotions at all. Having the emotions and turning away from passion on purpose towards a more reasonable way of thinking about life. Well, Data comes along, and Data's a different kind of guy. He sits in that same chair. He's totally logical. He's not a human. He's fascinated with humans, but he's not a human, and so he's a foil. Picard in the Next Generation is always having to explain to Data why humans do the crazy, weird, difficult, inexplicable bullshit that they do, right? So Data's job, sort of, on the Enterprise crew on the bridge, is to make people have to say in words what it is to be human. What are human motivations? Why do they act like this? And sort of get the audience thinking through for themselves, like what actually is it? What actually is it to be human? So he has no feelings at all, at least not in the beginning. No emotions to suppress or repress. He has superhuman strength and durability and intellect and like just the barest couple of Asimovian safeguards. And over the course of their shows, Spock and Data, of course, both grow up. They become more nuanced and more human. In the beginning, it seems like Nimoy doesn't know how to play Spock, and the script isn't super consistent, and the direction's not really quite there yet, right? The first season, the first couple shows, they haven't figured him out. That's not what I mean. I mean when the scripting is consistent and the acting is consistent and the characters nailed down. Same for Data, right? In the first couple of episodes, he's a little bit inconsistent, but the series grows up around him, and Brent Spiner like sinks into the part. The scripting gets consistent, and then they start to grow on purpose when they have emotional outbursts or emotional experiences. Right, those are done on purpose for a reason, for a storytelling reason. So Spock eventually learns to embrace his human side, to embrace his emotions, to embrace his friendships. And his friendship with McCoy and especially with Kirk, absolutely central to the show, central to the character. And Data gets an emotion chip. To absolutely disastrous end, as it turns out, he gets an emotion chip. So I'm from the 70s. I turned 18 in 1991. I was born in the 70s. I grew up through the 70s and 80s. We didn't have autism back then. When I was a school aged person, we didn't have autism. Kids like me were just weird. And weird wasn't tolerated, let alone celebrated. It was punished. I took a lot of punishment from other kids, from teachers, everybody. When I turned 18, man, I was awkward. I was robotic. I was not able to display any real emotions, and I didn't really feel much of any emotions. I didn't cry at my father's funeral. I didn't learn about autism until graduate school in my 30s, in the 2000s. Abraham Maslow gets touted as a key figure in the humanistic psychology movement. He isn't much to do with us in therapy land, um, but probably everyone's heard of some of his ideas, especially the hierarchy of needs. The top of this hierarchy is self actualization, and Maslow's sort of idea is a person needs food and water and temperature control and sex, and then they need shelter and a pointed stick to point at an enemy and some people around you to ward off the jaguars and a fire in the night. And then you need people around you who like you, and then you need to like yourself. When you can get through all of that, you have the potential for self actualization. This idea is that from where you're standing, you can imagine a better version of you, a more optimized, more ideal version of you. If all those lower order needs are met, you can imagine that person and you can start to try to grow towards being that person. You can make the ideal actual or self actualize. What's the difference between a dog and a human? Ultimately, that has to be agency. A dog wakes up in the morning and is full of dogness. The dog doesn't think about what kind of dog it wants to be today. I'm going to be a good dog. I'm going to fetch master slippers. I'm going to eat all my food, and if I have to throw up, not get it on the carpet. Nope, dogs don't have thoughts on that order. They are all primary process. Every dog is a good dog because dogs merely reflect their environment. If you meet a bad dog, it's because there's a bad dog manager or owner. A dog, a dog is affected by its experiences. Humans, of course, are also affected by their experiences, but we're the only animal that can demonstrably, under certain circumstances, choose how we will be affected by our experiences. In the end, Maslow probably is not quite right about self actualization. His arguments ultimately are tautological. That is, he says self actualization is a thing, And the self actualized person would have all of these traits. And because some people have these traits, therefore they have self actualized. Ultimately, that's not an argument, that's a definition. And we can have a long, boring argument about enlightenment. Is Maslow really thinking of enlightenment? Does the enlightened person become enlightened and then stay that way? Or does just sort of a regular person have a flash of insight, a moment of Satori, and then later on another one, and then another one, and those flashes of Satori, of momentary enlightenment, just become more frequent and last longer until they're spending more time in this sort of clear, lucid, higher level place and less time down here with the plebeians who are all stuck in our feelings. I'd say to the degree the idea is useful at all, you can see a certain distance from where you're standing. Right? From here, I could imagine a more perfect version of me. And I could work on becoming that version, but as I get closer to that version, as I advance, I learn more things, I do the work of empathy, I get better at insight, I can imagine an even better version. The version of me that I become in the future can imagine an even better version. And so self actualizing wouldn't be a job of work that we undertake and complete, and then we're finished with it and we live as that person thereafter. Self actualization then would not be a goal or a state. It would be about increasing degrees of freedom, becoming increasingly conscious, increasingly choiceful, purposeful, intentional, agentic. Data is a robot, an android. He's programmed, explicitly programmed. Spock too is programmed, not by men, but by his culture and by his experiences. They both evolve through their experiences, their associations, their friendships, their encounters with deep space, uncanniness, ambiguity, mortality. Spock dies and then is reincorporated in a new body. Data loses his head backwards in time and discovers it in the present, and thus he learns he is mortal. There's a little soliloquy where Data expresses gladness to learn that he must die one day rather than go on through eternity with no promise of a definite end, never aging, always outliving his friends. Data has something special. Data's programming is self-writing. He has agency software. At one point, he embarks on a romance with a crewmate, one of my favorite episodes. He has to write a romantic subroutine. He has to make decisions about dreams. He has to decide about emotions, whether to possess them or not, whether to take the risk in the light of the last time he had emotions, whether to turn off an emotion chip because his fear is affecting his performance one day when they have to fight the Borg. This is literal self actualization. This is imagining some ideal version of self and making that ideal actual. I learned a lot of stuff in graduate school. Most of it was reinforced and vivified by what I learned watching Star Trek with the avid interest of an autistic kid. Someone who was Data and needed those kindly explanations from the avuncular Captain Picard. I learned about agency and self creation. I learned that I was born with lines of code and with limitations. but also with the ability to write new code as situations arose. At some point, at some point, I decided to become a person, to take charge of the man I was going to be rather than just letting circumstance and happenstance program me. I'm the man I am because I decided to be. And I couldn't have made that decision without Spock. And I couldn't have made that decision without Data. Ultimately, this is a love letter to Brent Spiner. Hey, Brent, I love you.